A real live nephew of my Uncle Sam, born on the 4th of July. I got a Yankee Doodle sweetheart, she's my Yankee Doodle joy. Yankee Doodle came to London just to ride the ponies. I am a Yankee Doodle boy. And crown thy good with brotherhood from sea to shining sea. Oh, beautiful for pilgrims' feet who stern in passion stress, a thoroughfare for freedom's beat across the wilderness. America, America, God mend thine every flaw. Confirm thy soul in self-control, thy liberty in law. Yeah, it's down here. I got sticky notes. So now that Lenny's set, we're on a break, right?
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Jamestown has a long and proud history, and one of the reasons is we have had many distinguished individuals over the years who have brought pride and honor to our community and to our surrounding area. We're here today to recognize one of those individuals, Robert H. Jackson, who served not only our local community, but his country in a very, very distinguished and honorable way. I wish to welcome all of you here this morning. I'm extremely proud of the fact that Justice O'Connor has taken time from her busy schedule to be here this morning to share in this celebration with us. I would like to thank the Arts Council, and particularly Mike Foley and Phil Morris, and all of the others who have done such a magnificent job in helping prepare for this day. I thank you again for being here. I hope you enjoy it. Enjoy the day, and make Jamestown proud. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor Kimball. It's been my very great honor to chair the Citizens Committee for the creation of a monument to Justice Robert Jackson. Justice Jackson was born in Frewsburg, New York, and after a successful career as a lawyer here in Jamestown, during which time he credited much of his future success to his education at Jamestown High School, he was appointed by President Roosevelt to a variety of positions with the federal government in Washington. It's interesting to note that he started out as general counsel to what is now the IRS. But it was uphill from there. He became the chief counsel for the tax division in the Justice Department, assistant attorney general, solicitor general of the United States, and ultimately attorney general of the United States before, in 1941, being appointed to the Supreme Court by President Roosevelt. He served on the Supreme Court throughout the rest of his life, but I think really it's the years immediately after World War II for which he is most well known and where he faced his greatest challenges. Immediately after victory in Europe, the Allied governments decided to try the leaders of the Nazi German regime for war crimes and crimes against humanity. This kind of concept of trying the vanquished foe by a victorious government after a war was unprecedented. And Judge Jackson, as the chief American prosecutor, was instrumental in both establishing what laws to apply to that situation and the procedures that were going to be used to try these people, and of course, ultimately was key to getting a conviction of the worst of the Nazi war criminals. Following the Nuremberg proceedings, Justice Jackson, of course, returned to the bench in the Supreme Court until his untimely death. He died in 1954. I'm proud to note, and I'll give them an opportunity later for you to meet them, but I'm proud to note that Judge Jackson's son, William, and his daughter Mary are here with us today as we dedicate this monument to Judge Jackson. There are a lot of people that were involved in this process, and I want to briefly thank all of them if I can. I want to start out by thanking someone very, very particularly, and that is Mr. John D. Hamilton, without whom I don't think any of us would be standing here today dedicating this monument. Mr. Hamilton, as president of the Gebbe Foundation, is with us today. In fact, on Sunday, he's going to celebrate his 96th birthday. I think he's going to start taking weekends off now. It was John's particular dream, I think, to see this community create some kind of tangible monument to Judge Jackson. And it was really his leadership and his inspiration which made us all work extra hard to make it happen. I might add that he always delivered his inspiration in a kind of civility and gentle good humor that you see so rarely anymore when someone's trying to persuade you to do something. So I have to compliment John on his ability both to inspire and to lead, and to do it in a way that creates good comradeship and fellowship among the people involved. It was a very great honor for me to work with John, and I thank him very much. John, of course, would be the first to minimize his own contribution to this matter and point to everyone else's work, so I'm going to do the same thing. The Gebbe Foundation Board, of course, deserves thanks for their financial support for this project. The members of the Citizens Committee, Mayor Kimball, Dwight Wilson, Vince DeJoy, Ted Smith, and Greg Rabb from the Jamestown Community College, Todd Eagle, Craig King, and Deke Kathman from the Jamestown Schools, Kristen Stein from the Fenton Historical Center, Philip Morris from the Arts Council, Rod Drake, Stan Lundeen. All these folks have been absolutely wonderful, and it's been my privilege and pleasure to work with them. The members of the panels that actually selected the piece and sifted through all the various competing proposals we received deserve special thanks. They worked very hard making very difficult decisions early on in the project, and it's good to look back to that early stage and recognize their achievement. In addition to Mayor Kimball, there were many employees of the City of Jamestown who need to be thanked for this. The Department of Parks and Recreation, particularly Doug Hoisington and his staff, the Department of Public Works, Jeff Lehman and his crew, the Jamestown Police Department, the Fire Department, all of them have really come through from time to time as necessary to make this project happen and create this monument to the city's most famous son. The Arts Council, I've already mentioned Phil Morris, but the rest of the staff there have been instrumental in designing the selection process, implementing it, and working very hard to bring the project to a fruition. The Jamestown Schools, of course, and their staff have been active in not only donating the site, of course, but also helping us prepare it for today. Lots of individuals, Rod Drake and his partners at Habitera and Associates, for their kind agreement to maintain the shrubbery and greenery around the piece. Bob Brown, an engineer who engineered the base and did a lot of the work just at our request for nothing. The Fenton Historical Society and its many volunteers all provided lots of service in lots of different ways. The Jamestown Bar Association provided financial support for the project. My partners at Phillips Lytle, who provided a little financial support but mostly let me free to leave the office and do this. We deserve special thanks today to the Catherine Harris Community Center. That's the organization that's hosting the reception in the tent behind me. They're the ones who are welcoming us into their neighborhood and welcoming this new addition and asking us all to celebrate it with them after the ceremony. Thank you also to Tops Markets, who has donated the beverages and food for this morning's reception. I know I've missed somebody. If I have, please know that you have our thanks and our congratulations today. Last but not least, I want to thank the teachers and the students here at Love School. They're the ones who gave up a portion of their precious green space out here in the middle of the city so we could build a monument to Judge Jackson. I hope Justice Jackson will serve as an inspiration for them and for the children that come after them. They should know that any one of them, like Judge Jackson, can rise to great, great heights. They should also know that once they do, they should apply the same common sense values and knowledge of right and wrong that Judge Jackson brought to the world's most difficult problems. Like them, or like him, they can grow up to apply those values to the problems that they face in the future. So on behalf of the community, I want to ask you all to join me and thank everyone involved in reaching today's celebration with a heartfelt thanks and a round of applause. I mentioned that there was a selection process for this piece. It was extensive and very public and really quite fascinating. The selection panel had proposals from all over the country, Canada, and even in Europe. But when we finally got down to it, we didn't have to go too far. The successful proposal and the piece that's standing next to me now was created by Dexter Benedict, who's a sculptor from Penn Yan, New York, just to the east of us. Mr. Benedict is a native of Oneida, New York. He's a graduate of Ottawa University in Ottawa, Kansas, and the University of North Carolina, with degrees in art and sculpture. Since 1983, he's been creating various works in cast bronze at his own studio and foundry in Penn Yan. He also does foundry work for other artists who work in cast bronze and aluminum. His work's been shown in galleries throughout the country and appears in collections worldwide. Mr. Benedict has created public sculptures for a variety of public and private commissions, including ones for St. John Fisher College, Chase Lincoln First Bank, and the Pyramid Companies in Syracuse. Mr. Benedict is here today with his wife and daughter, So it's my pleasure to introduce Mr. Dexter Benedict.
I would just like to say a word of thanks, add my word of thanks to those already given for all the people who worked to make this monument, this project, a reality. And thank you for the honor and the privilege and the challenge of being a part of this. It was a labor of love and something that was inspiring to me in the process. And again, thank you very much for that. And I want to thank my daughter Susan for suggesting that the spinnaker be used to cover the statue for the unveiling, the appropriate color, red, white, and blue. So thank you.
Thank you, Dexter. I know our guest of honor, being a sailor herself, recognized immediately that that was a spinnaker. One of the reasons we honor people who have left our communities and achieved great things is because we assume that the seeds of that greatness are sown here at home. In Judge Jackson's case, there's a good reason to think that. Throughout his career, he maintained certain virtues of integrity and hard work, community service, fairness, moral clarity, that we like to think he derived from and what we associate with a small town life. One of the people who was in a unique place to discern those values in Judge Jackson was his son, Bill Jackson, who's with us today. Of course, Bill knew his father as a parent and a companion in his early years, but he also had the privilege of knowing him as a professional. As a young lawyer, Bill Jackson stood by his father's side at Nuremberg when he faced probably the greatest challenges of his career. Before and even after Judge Jackson's death, Mr. Jackson worked in editing and helping prepare for publication some of Judge Jackson's writings. Mr. Jackson, of course, on his own has achieved a great and very successful legal career. He's a graduate of Yale University and Harvard Law School. He's currently a partner with the New York City law firm of Milbank, Tweed, Hadley, and McCoy. It's with great pleasure that I introduce Mr. William E. Jackson.
Ladies and gentlemen, this is, in a sense, the return of the native, as far as I'm concerned, because I grew up here, or at least I thought I was growing up. I spent my early years here, and one has to come from the canyons of Manhattan to realize what a truly beautiful place Jamestown in Chautauqua County is. It's really a jewel of countryside. On behalf of the Jackson family, which is my sister Mary Jackson Craighill and her husband Bowden, and my cousin Harold Adams and his wife Mariana, we would like to add our own deep gratitude to all the people who've already been mentioned, but particularly the Jamestown Bar Association, the Fenton Historical Society, and above all, the young John Hamilton of the Gebbe Foundation for their steadfast vision and support in creating this truly inspiring memorial to our father, this park and the statue. We're also particularly honored, as we all are, to have Justice O'Connor with us today to make the dedication address. The only words that I would add at this time are those which are inscribed on my father's tombstone at Frewsburg. After reciting his various public positions, from Solicitor General to Chief Prosecutor of the Nazi war criminals, the following words are engraved. He kept the ancient landmarks and helped create the new. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Jackson. I would like to ask Mrs. Craighill and Mr. Jackson to step down to the side of the piece, and I'd also ask Dexter Benedict to come up and show us how to do what we are now very, very proud to do, and that is to unveil the statue to Judge Jackson. Thank you very much, Bill, Mary, Dexter, for helping us with that. For most of us, the opportunity to introduce someone like our principal speaker this morning is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. It would be privilege enough for me merely because she's risen to the top of her profession and mine, because she's a national and internationally known figure, and because her decisions and her work affect millions of Americans, and in fact, the life of the world from time to time. But how really do you properly introduce someone whose place in history has already been assured? Justice Sandra Day O'Connor is the first woman to serve on the Supreme Court of the United States. More than that, she's emerged as a leader of the Supreme Court's moderate voices, a consensus builder on a court whose divisions, I think, reflect the divisions that are occurring in our society as a result of the changes in the way we look at ourselves and the way we look at our government. In that sense, as a conciliator and a consensus builder, she displays exactly the qualities we all need to display in order that our country can achieve orderly and successful and peaceful change. Justice O'Connor is suited to her task, I think, in part because of her origins. Like Judge Jackson and so many other great American people, she's a product of rural America. In her case, she grew up on a ranch in southeastern Arizona. Her pioneer grandfather founded the ranch in the early 1880s, and it's been in the Day family ever since. I understand it's called the Lazy Bee Ranch. But as anyone who farms will tell you, if you're lazy, you're unlikely to hold on to your farm for even one generation, let alone three. So Justice O'Connor comes well by her reputation for being a hard worker. Some other words I've heard and read used to describe Judge O'Connor probably also have their roots in her background in rural Arizona. She's been described as independent, self-reliant, pragmatic, stern but fair. Having ridden down with her and with John this morning, I can add gracious and inquisitive to that list. Justice O'Connor attended Stanford University. She completed a 4-year regular program and a 3-year law school program in 6 years instead of the normal 7, and managed to squeak by 4th in her class. That class included now Chief Justice Rehnquist, so the competition obviously was severe. Despite these achievements, Justice O'Connor was unable to get a job with a major law firm following graduation. She worked as a part-time county attorney before moving to Germany with her husband John, who had joined the Army and who served in the Judge Advocate General's Corps. They then moved to Phoenix, Arizona, where the first of her 2 sons was born. She practiced law part-time while raising her family, and then began working full-time as Assistant Attorney General for the state of Arizona. From there, she was appointed to fill an unexpired term in the state Senate. Apparently, she enjoyed that because she then ran for the seat and won it, and stayed in the state Senate for 5 years. She became the Senate Majority Leader for the state of Arizona Senate, the first woman to ever hold such a position in this country. In 1974, she changed her career path to the judicial branch, winning a hard-fought election for the County Superior Court judgeship. In 1979, the governor of Arizona appointed her to the Court of Appeals, and in 1981, President Ronald Reagan appointed her to the U.S. Supreme Court. She was confirmed, incidentally, by 91 out of 92 members, the 92nd member not being present, but who later indicated that he would have supported the nomination. As a justice, Justice O'Connor is an advocate of judicial restraint. She respects the division between the judicial branch and the legislative and executive branches, as it's set out in the Constitution. As she said during her confirmation, courts are not only unauthorized to perform executive or legislative functions, they're also ill-equipped to do so. She's also shown herself to recognize the inherent powers of the states under our federal system, and she's been increasingly concerned about the burdens that are being placed on our federal courts. All of these values have endeared her to conservatives, but at the same time she's gone very much her own way on issues like sex discrimination, civil rights, and of course the issue of abortion. During her tenure, she's applied the basic values of hard work, thorough preparation, fairness, and realism to some of the most intractable problems that face our society. In that respect, she's the perfect person to speak today to dedicate this monument to Judge Jackson. I'm honored and pleased to introduce the United States Supreme Court Justice Sandra Day O'Connor.
Thank you, Tom. Thank you. This is a wonderful occasion for Jamestown and for all of us who are lucky enough to be here and see the unveiling of this absolutely handsome and strong statue of Justice Jackson. We're remembering today a product of this community and of its public schools. The most treasured honor that anyone can receive is one that comes from one's hometown, from those who knew the honoree first and best. So it is today. Robert Jackson, one of the finest justices ever to sit on the bench of the United States Supreme Court, grew up on a farm close to Jamestown. It was here that he attended the Jamestown Elementary and High School, that he married, had his children, and practiced law. It was here that he spoke in 1935 at the dedication of the new Jamestown High School building. He said then, "If you believe, as I believe, that democracy is the form of government best adapted to our people, then you must regard the public school as the most fundamental concern of our society. Democracy will..." Democracy will always call most of its leaders from the ranks of humble men, and to equip them, it must provide free education to the sons and daughters of disadvantaged homes. Robert Jackson was born, as you've heard, in 1892. I thought it was in Pennsylvania, not New York. Early in his life, the family did move to a farm in this area. His father was a farmer, a lumberman, and a stock breeder. He advised his son Robert to become a doctor. Instead, on graduating from Jamestown High School, Jackson read law in a Jamestown law office, spent 1 year in Albany Law School, and was admitted to the New York bar at age 21. Now, this is the last justice of the Supreme Court to have gotten there without ever going to law school. That's an amazing record. Justice Jackson was a voracious reader of the classics, of biography and history. He practiced law in this city successfully, and he married Irene Alice Gerhardt of nearby Kingston. And their 2 children here today, William and Mary Margaret, also grew up in this area. Justice Jackson served as president of the Jamestown Bar Association, chairman of the American Bar National Conference of Delegates, and it was President Franklin Roosevelt who persuaded a reluctant Jackson to leave Jamestown and go to Washington, D.C. As you've heard, his first job there being general counsel to the Internal Revenue Service. And he subsequently served, as you also heard, in the Department of Justice, heading its tax division, and then heading the antitrust division. In 1938, President Roosevelt appointed Jackson as Solicitor General of the United States. He argued many cases successfully before the United States Supreme Court in that capacity. You know, the Solicitor General is the nation's lawyer. And Justice Brandeis, who was on the court, so admired Jackson's work as Solicitor General that he said Jackson should be Solicitor General for life. But of course he wasn't, because the president then appointed Jackson as Attorney General in 1940, and in 1941 as Associate Justice of the United States Supreme Court. He served in that capacity for 13 years until the year of his death in 1954. Now, for a lawyer or a judge, reading a Jackson Supreme Court opinion is a special treat. He wrote always with clarity, with style, and with persuasion. His opinions are just studded with wonderful passages and quotations. For example, he wrote of the court that we are not final because we are infallible, but we are infallible because we are final. He wrote strongly in support of individual liberties and in opposition to arbitrary government action. In his opinion for the court in Board of Education versus Barnett, which held a school child may not be compelled against his will to recite the Pledge of Allegiance, he said the very purpose of the Bill of Rights was to withdraw certain subjects from the vicissitudes of public controversy, to place them beyond the reach of majorities and of officials. In the Korematsu case, upholding the wartime confinement of Japanese Americans in relocation camps, Justice Jackson dissented, saying, now if any fundamental assumption underlies our system, it is that guilt is personal, not inheritable. And of course, he was justified many years later by the common assumption that that opinion was, the majority opinion was wrong, and Congress finally rectified it many, many years later. President Roosevelt had promised to nominate Justice Jackson as Chief Justice when Chief Justice Stone retired. but it never came to pass. President Roosevelt died and was succeeded, of course, by President Truman. Truman asked Justice Jackson to serve as chief prosecutor of the Nazi war criminals in Nuremberg in 1945. Defying the preferences of his colleagues on the court, Jackson agreed to do this task. The other justices thought his absence left the court shorthanded and that no other assignment should be accepted by a sitting member of the court. But Justice Jackson recognized the enormous importance of a successful effort to collect evidence and expose to the world the extent and the enormity of the Holocaust. Jackson believed that the long months he spent in Nuremberg were the most important, enduring, and constructive of his life. Nuremberg at that time was, in his words, in terrible shape, there being no telephone communications, the streets full of rubble, with some 20,000 dead bodies reported still in it, the smell of death hovering over it, no public transportation, no shops, no commerce, and no lights. After 10 months in this place and 17,000 transcript pages of testimony, 19 of 21 defendants were convicted and sentenced. As Jackson put it, the evidence is there with such authenticity and in such detail that there can be no responsible denial of these crimes in the future, and no tradition of martyrdom of the Nazi leaders can arise among informed people. And he hoped to create a precedent that would make explicit that to persecute, oppress, and do violence to individuals or to minorities on political, racial, or religious grounds is an international crime. Today, 50-plus years later, the world is again witnessing an attempt to apply that precedent in new war crimes proceedings in Brussels and in Rwanda, to serve again as the voice of human decency following the unspeakable atrocities in Rwanda and in Bosnia-Herzegovina. We're following the path beaten by Robert Jackson for the protection of basic human liberties. Robert Jackson is a product of this wonderful community, of its soil, of its people, its public schools. It was here that he learned his lifelong curiosity for knowledge, an inspiration to seek self-improvement by hard work, and the courage to take responsibility. He knew education was not the formal years of study, but a lifelong process. With your statue of this great man, you will help everyone who sees it to further his or her own inspiration and his or her own self-improvement. Congratulations to Jamestown and to all of you. Thank you.
I want to express my great gratitude to Justice O'Connor for speaking and providing us with those thoughts. I'd also like to thank the members of the Jackson family and everyone else who has come to celebrate this event today. And I'd like to invite everyone to join us for a celebration in the tent behind us as we celebrate the dedication of this statue. Thank you all very much for coming.
There's going to be a lot of Greg.
Yes, but I think that's very
One, two. Check. One.
This must be him.
Nice place to put it, right?
Yeah, really.
I don't mind if I do this little going up or you're going to stand there.
Hey, Mike. Nice
Well, he was pretty terrific, don't you think? That's what I think.
You do good work. Thank you. That's
I think it helps Mary proud so much. Thank you. I'm not even sure if this is
Okay.